This is the web transmission service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. On October the 24th, Military History Night hosted our annual Hallowe'en Special with our very own award-winning science fiction writer Derwin Mack. His dread topic, the evolution of Satan. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? Attention, please. I am called upon at the last moment to introduce our speaker, Derwin Mack, who in fact needs no introduction. He's an award-winning science fiction writer, and what more can be said? He's also been a member for many years. But since I don't want to give anybody short weight on an introduction, I will tell you about the evolution of Halloween. And it seems that at the end of the 17th century, there were sausage sellers in the streets of old New York, and they went gaily about their business selling sausages. But there was a bylaw that at midnight of the 31st of October, they had to be off the streets of New York. But that meant that around noon, the sausage sellers who had not succeeded in selling off their stock began to get a little nervous. And by the time evening came, they were going around banging hard on doors going, "Hello, weenies! Hello, weenies!" And over to you, Derwin.
Okay.
They'll never let me do that again.
No, they won't. All right, thank you, everyone. And tonight the topic of the lecture is the evolution of Satan. Right, so we've all heard of Satan. He's a character in the three major religions that came out of the Middle East: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But as we shall see, he's had a very diverse career, numerous personality changes, and he's not necessarily the person or character you think he is, at least not to everybody else. So before we start, I'll go over some of the terminology that I'll be using. You may hear me refer to Christian mythology or Jewish mythology or Islamic mythology or myths. Now, today when we use the word myth or mythology, we often use it to mean a story that isn't true, like a fairy tale, or like the myth that George Washington cut down a cherry tree when he was a child, right? But I'm not going to use the words myth or mythology with that meaning. I'm going to use those words in their original meaning, which was sacred narrative. That is, stories of gods and deities that are part of a religion. And therefore, in that meaning, I'm not putting any value judgment on whether these stories were true or ever happened. Okay? I'm also going to be using the terms BCE and CE instead of BC and AD. It's become trendy, or I guess enlightened in recent years, to use the terms before Common Era and Common Era instead of before Christ and Anno Domini, or in the year of our Lord. That's because people think that BC and AD are too Christian-centric, so the terms BCE and CE, before the Common Era and the Common Era, have come to use. Although all these terms actually use the same point of reference, so you still wind up dating things from the birth of Christ. Now, there's also some terminology that we typically use to describe the Bible. We often use the terms Old Testament and New Testament, but a very left-wing liberal rabbi told me that she didn't like to use the terms Old Testament and New Testament because they implied that Christianity had replaced Judaism. So I'm going to use the more modern terms, Hebrew Bible, usually the Masoretic text, which I'll describe later, and the Christian Bible. Okay, you'll hear me quote from two holy books, the Bible and the Quran, and I'll define which translations I'll be using tonight. God knows translations are very contentious. In the past, people have been hanged or burned at the stake for promoting what was considered the wrong type of translation. For the Bible, I'll be using the New American Bible, which is the English translation by the Catholic Biblical Association of America. It's the one authorized by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. And for the Quran, I'll be using N.J. Dawood's English translation, which he started in 1956 and kept on updating all the way to 1999. Okay, so when you think of Satan, you probably think of some great, all-powerful, evil arch-enemy of God, who's the source of all evil and wickedness in the universe, right? Then, so if that's what you think Satan is, you would think that God spends in the mythology of Judaism and Christianity, that God would spend a lot of his time fighting against Satan. But that isn't what happens in the Jewish mythology. In the Hebrew Bible, all the evil comes from human beings. All the evildoers are human beings. There is no great supernatural demonic spirit that makes all the evil and wickedness in the world. The first murder in history in the Jewish mythology is when Cain killed Abel, but Cain does that completely of his own volition. No evil demon or spirit, enters his body and makes him do evil things or possesses him. So in the first murder is completely due to human volition. And then when God decides that there's way too much sin and wickedness in the world, he doesn't go and fight off, evil demons and spirits and some great supernatural controller of all evil. He sends a flood down to drown the human beings. Well, most of them, right? But he finds a city that has way too much wickedness and sin in it, Sodom. Again, he doesn't blame supernatural demons or Satan or any other supernatural source for the cause of evil. He realizes the cause of evil is human beings. So he nukes Sodom. But what about that serpent in the Garden of Eden? The serpent that tempts Eve into eating that forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge, right? What about that serpent? Well, that serpent's a curious character. He only shows up once in the Bible and is never seen again. And then when God finds out that his two humans have disobeyed him, right, he does curse the serpent, but he puts all the blame on the two humans. He doesn't consider the serpent to be any mitigating circumstance, right? So again, we see throughout the Jewish mythology that all evil comes from human beings. There is no great supernatural source of it. The Hebrew Bible has a word in it, Satan, right? And what is a Satan? Well, Satan is Hebrew for adversary or enemy. Now, the word Satan is used 27 times in the Hebrew Bible, and in none of those instances does it refer to an all-powerful archenemy of God or the creator of all evil. Most of the Satans are human beings. Indeed, even the future King David is referred to as a Satan or a Satan. In the first book of Samuel, chapter 29, verse 4, the Philistines are talking about King David, or the future King David, and they say, he, that is David, must not go down into battle with us, lest during battle he becomes our enemy. Now, enemy is the English word, but in the Hebrew Bible, it's Satan. Well, what about the Satans who are not human? Because a few of those appear in the Hebrew Bible as well. Well, they're not necessarily evil either. Some of them actually turn out to be angels sent by God to do God's work. For example, in the book of Numbers, there's a originally wicked prophet named Balaam who wants to put a curse on the Israelites, right? And God sends an angel down to stop him. Well, in the Hebrew Bible, that angel is called a Satan or a Satan because he's the adversary sent down to stop Balaam. Now, Hebrew, in common with all the Semitic languages, does not have an indefinite article, right? So you know what I mean by an indefinite article. An indefinite article is like the word a, so a dog, right? But Hebrew does have a definite article, ha, which corresponds to the or the in English, right? So in English, a dog is not the same as the dog. The dog refers to a specific dog, right? All the Satans I've mentioned so far do not have the ha definite article, right? However, if a Satan showed up as a ha Satan, the adversary, the enemy, that must be someone definite and likely very important. And in Jewish mythology, a ha Satan eventually does appear. He appears in the book of Job, right? Where many of us are familiar with the book of Job, right? So God wants to test whether Job, his most loyal follower, will ever forsake him. And he sends Satan down to earth to inflict all these terrible tragedies and illnesses and death and destruction on Job. But despite all these problems, Job never abandons God, never forsakes him. Right? So yeah, there's a famous picture by William Blake of Satan smiting Job with sore boils. Okay. So this ha-Satan is much more powerful than any previous Satan or Satan previously mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. He's powerful, but is he evil yet? Well, what's his job? Well, ha-Satan shows up at the beginning of the book of Job when God is calling a meeting with his angels, and ha-Satan shows up at the meeting, and God asks him, "Where have you been?" And Satan says he's been roaming the earth. So it appears he's in close contact with us. He's been observing us. Right. And he's the only other character than God in the Hebrew Bible who has an immense power over humans. He's obviously a foil to God. Whereas God is the source of all happiness, ha-Satan is the source of all misery. But he is not evil, at least not yet. He works for God, not against him. He goes and inflicts all these miseries on Job, who's a symbol of the human race, upon God's orders. Okay. Now, when people were translating the Bible from Hebrew into other languages like English, they treated ha-Satan as a proper name and converted it to Satan. So that's how we get the proper name Satan, to emphasize that this is a distinct character or person, not just any ordinary adversary or enemy lurking about. Now, ha-Satan makes another appearance in the book of Zechariah. And in Zechariah chapter 3, verse 1, Zechariah has a vision that someone named Joshua, a high priest, not the same Joshua from the book of Exodus, is on trial, right? And there's an angel acting as in trial in front of God, and there's an angel acting as his defense attorney, and ha-Satan shows up as the prosecuting attorney. Right? So here's the quote. "Then he showed me Joshua, the high priest, standing before the angel of the Lord, while Satan stood at his right hand to accuse him." Again, although ha-Satan is an adversary or an enemy of a human being, Joshua, again, he's acting for God, because God is holding a trial and requires both a prosecuting attorney and a defense attorney. And interesting enough, God isn't fighting against Satan in Joshua, in the book of Zechariah. Satan's just there doing his job. So this is interesting, that this character appeared at some time in Jewish mythology. Well, where did the Jews get this new, powerful character in their mythology? The answer is interesting. They got him from Babylon and Iran. And I'll explain. To understand how this new powerful, malevolent character entered the Jewish mythology, we have to go back to the time when there were two Jewish kingdoms instead of one. The Jews originally had one country or one kingdom, but there was a dispute over who would succeed King Solomon after he died. And so the different claimants to the throne split the country apart and set up two monarchies, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. This was the original two-state solution. These two monarchies existed until they were both conquered by foreign invaders. In 720 BCE, Assyria invaded Israel and conquered it. And then in 587 BCE, Babylon invaded Judah and conquered it. The Babylonians were notorious for destroying the Temple of Jerusalem, which at the time was a center of Jewish religious life. The Babylonians also took several thousand of the elite of the Judean upper class, the royalty, the nobility, the scholars, the priests, and so on, and exiled them to Babylon. And this is the period known as the Babylonian exile, or the Babylonian captivity. The Babylonian captivity lasted for about 60 years until Babylon itself was conquered by another foreign power, Iran or Persia. This is a picture of Cyrus the Great, the Shah of Iran who conquered Babylon. And he ended the Babylonian captivity. He allowed the Jews to leave Babylon and go back home to Judah. Some of them did go back to Judah, and others stayed around in Babylon and Iran, and thus began the Jewish communities in Iraq and Iran that existed for a very long time, up until the late 20th century. During the Babylonian captivity and after it, the Jews had a lot of contact with the Iranians. Even the Jews who went back to Judah could not escape Iranian influence. The Judah they went back to was not an independent country, but rather another place ruled by the Iranian Empire. But the Iranians, at that time, left their subject peoples to practice their own religion and keep their culture. And it's interesting to note that the Bible, the books of the Bible that were written during and after the Babylonian captivity include the book of Job and the book of Zechariah. In other words, this powerful, malevolent being, Ha-Satan, entered the Jewish mythology during the Babylonian captivity. So there must have been something that the Jewish scholars and priests and nobility saw in Babylon or in Iran. And that something was the Iranian religion, Zoroastrianism. Right? It's one of the oldest religions in the world. It's also one of the earliest monotheistic religions. It has one all-powerful god called Ahura Mazda. This is not Ahura Mazda. That's a picture of Zoroaster, the founder of the religion. Now here's Ahura Mazda, the one god of Zoroastrianism. But Ahura Mazda was not alone. There was an evil, destructive, powerful spirit named Angra Mainyu, the cause of all evil in the universe. Right? And Ahura Mazda was always fighting against Angra Mainyu. Here's a picture of an Iranian king fighting Angra Mainyu. It's from the ruins of Persepolis in Iran. For some reason, ancient Iranian kings like to make pictures of themselves fighting off evil spirits. Zoroastrianism has a prophecy that there will be a gigantic battle at the end of time where the forces of evil will fight against the forces of good, but the good side will prevail. And of course, Ahura Mazda will lead the forces of good, and Angra Mainyu will lead the forces of evil. Right? And here's yet another Iranian picture of an Iranian Shah fighting off the forces of evil. So you can see that this idea that there is some all-powerful, malevolent spirit being out there is borrowed from Zoroastrianism. And the timing works out because these ideas that the Jews had of Ha-Satan coincide with their period of interaction with the Iranians and the Babylonians. The period after the Babylonian captivity is called the Second Temple period. That's because when the Jews returned to Judah, they built another temple in Jerusalem. This is not actually the real Second Temple in Jerusalem. The Romans destroyed it in 70 CE. This is actually a reproduction at an evangelical theme park at Holy Land Experience in Orlando, Florida. Now, the Second Temple period was filled with what scholars call Jewish apocalyptic literature. There were many priests and clergy and religious scholars and prophets writing religious books that predicted that there would be some upcoming apocalypse in the universe. Right? For example, the first book of Enoch has a fallen angel named Shemahaza, and he leads other angels who've been expelled out of heaven by God. It's also the first religious text out of any of the three Middle Eastern religions that mentions hell, which is described as a river of fire. And of course, it's about this big apocalyptic battle between the forces of good and the forces of evil. Right? Again, this is a concept borrowed from Zoroastrianism. The first book of Enoch, though, if you look in the Bible, either the Christian or the Jewish ones that we have readily available in Toronto, you won't find it there because when the Masoretes, a group of scholars who decided to compile the definitive standard version of the Hebrew Bible, were editing the Bible, they decided to leave it out. They found some parts of it to be heretical. And most Christian Bibles omit the first book of Enoch as well. But the Ethiopian Jews and the Ethiopian Coptic Christians consider it to be canonical, so their Bibles include this book. Okay. And interestingly, it's also in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Another famous example of Jewish apocalyptic literature from the Second Temple period is the War Scroll, which is a short name for the scroll of the war between the sons of light and the sons of darkness, right? And this is another prophecy of a final battle between good and evil. It has a good angel named Michael who will lead the forces of good, called the sons of light, and an evil angel named Belial will lead the forces of evil, called the sons of darkness. This angel named Michael will reappear in Christianity as Saint Michael the Archangel, patron saint of the police. Now, if this imagery of the sons of light fighting the sons of darkness seems eerily familiar today, it should, because Benjamin Netanyahu's been using it increasingly in speeches in Israel. On October 16th last year, when he was addressing the Knesset, he called the war against Hamas, this is a struggle between the children of light and the children of darkness. So Netanyahu has been increasingly using a lot of this Jewish apocalyptic literature for imagery in his speeches. But although this idea of an upcoming apocalypse is certainly in the background of Jewish culture, you won't find any of these apocalyptic texts in the current Hebrew Bible, right? And that's because the Masoretes excluded them from the standard version of the Bible. Interestingly, Judaism is a very old religion. It probably goes back 3,000 years. Yet the standard Hebrew Bible that you see today is only about 1,000 years old. For centuries, the Jews had all sorts of religious books which they used, right? And some of them, everyone agreed, was part of the canon. For example, the 5 books that Moses wrote, the Torah, right? But then there were all sorts of other books that some people thought were canonical and some people didn't think were canonical. And starting in the 7th century, a group of Jewish religious scholars called the Masoretes began to compile what they wanted to be used as the standard definitive version of the Bible. So they decided what books got into the Bible and which ones were left out. And Christianity went through the same process as well, of deciding which books to put into a standard Bible and which didn't. And you may have noticed that every Christian denomination has a different opinion of which books should be in the Bible and which should be left out. The Masoretes excluded the apocalyptic prophecies from their standard Bible. So even though these ideas of an apocalypse and a battle between the forces of good and evil exist in the consciousness and culture of a society, they are not considered canonical in Judaism. But their ideas did stay around and influence the next religion to pop up in the Middle East, the one founded by this guy. Not me, the guy standing beside me, right? Again, this is a scene from Holy Land Experience, that evangelical theme park in Orlando, Florida. Right? So Christianity came out of the Middle East as well, a religion centered around Jesus Christ. It's debatable whether he really intended to form a new religion, but whatever his intentions were, a new religion did emerge around him. And in Christianity, Ha-Satan became much more active than he was in Judaism. Right? He's no longer God's prosecuting attorney or some enforcer acting for God. Now he's actually a free agent working for evil. And Ha-Satan shows up to tempt Jesus in the desert. Then Ha-Satan shows up again to tempt Judas Iscariot to betray Jesus. And the last book of the Christian Bible, the book of Revelation, is one large apocalyptic prophecy, right? Again, about a final battle between the forces of good and evil. In Revelation, Satan leads the enemy forces. Right? The picture might need some explaining. That evangelical theme park in Orlando, Florida, has a play at the end of the day, which is based on the book of Revelation. And there's a scene in the play where Jesus and Satan get into a wrestling match. And I shot this photo of Jesus in the white outfit knocking out Satan, who's lying on the floor in the black outfit. And that's a horrible wig, but anyway. By the way, interesting trivia, the guy who used to play Jesus at Holy Land Experience also had another job playing Shaggy from Scooby-Doo at Universal Studios down the street. All right. Now, Christianity introduced new names for Ha-Satan. The Christian Bible was written in Greek. And the Greek word for adversary, enemy, is diabolos, right? So that's a direct translation from Satan. And out of that word, we get the English words the devil and diabolical, the Spanish word el diablo, and the French word le diable. Around 610 CE, another religion popped up in the Middle East, Islam. And this is the cave of Hira. This is the cave where Muhammad received his first revelations from God. And Islam also borrowed the Ha-Satan, or Satan character, from the previous two religions. Now, these are the names of Satan in Islam. Arabic has the word shaitan, similar to the Hebrew Satan, and shaitan means evil beings or demons. They've existed in Arab culture since before Islam. Right? Arabic, like Hebrew, does not have an indefinite article, but it does have a definite article, al. So if you add al to shaitan and say al shaitan, that means the demon. But that isn't necessarily the Satan that we see in Judaism or Christianity, because Arab culture gave him another proper name, Ibli. Right? Now, N.J. Daywood, when he was translating the Quran into contemporary English in 1956, translated Ibli's name as Satan. So he chose the English Christian name for Satan in his translation of the Bible. But Ibli, Satan, Ha-Satan, they're the same person. The picture is of Count Ibli from that old TV show, Battlestar Galactica. And as you can see from the way he looks, Count Ibli was obviously one of the villains of the show. It's interesting to see how the words Satan and Ibli are used in the Middle East today. The Iranian regime is fond of calling the United States the Great Satan and Israel the Little Satan. But that's often misunderstood in the West as saying they're comparing those two countries to Satan. What they're really saying is that they're not really comparing the United States and Israel to Satan, the Prince of Darkness. They're really saying that they're just big and smaller demons, right? And this is obvious in a translation of a speech by Ali Khamenei, supreme leader of Iran, that got translated in English by Al Jazeera. This great Satan is a very meaningful expression. Chief among all Satans in the world is Ibli. But as the Quran specifies, Ibli can only seduce people. He beguiles people. The US, however, both seduces and murders people. Satan has very mysterious origins in Judaism and Christianity. We don't know, how he was created. We don't really know where he lives. We don't know what he does most of the time. But Islam gave him an origin story. When God created Adam, his most perfect creation, he told his angels to bow down in front of Adam. But one angel refused to bow down in front of the first man, and that was Ibli. So in this picture, you see Adam standing on the platform, and in the middle of the picture are all the angels bowing before him, and at the back is the rebel angel Ibli, who refuses to bow before Adam. God asked Ibli, why are you not bowing down? And Ibli says that God created him, Ibli, out of fire, whereas he created Adam out of clay. And a person made out of fire is superior to a person made out of clay. So Ibli felt he was superior to Adam, and therefore should not bow down in front of him. Then God and Ibli get into an argument, right? And the argument ends with God kicking Ibli out of heaven, right? So that's Satan getting thrown out of heaven. Ibli, or Satan, doesn't like being evicted out of heaven, so he makes a great speech about how he will go to God's creations, the human race, and get them to turn against God at every opportunity. And in Islam, when Satan got kicked out of heaven, his job changed. He was no longer an angel, and then he went on to become leader of the shaitans, the demons that were already lurking out there. Now, of all the three Middle Eastern religions, Islam is the one with the most explicit display of opposition to Satan. And that happens during the Hajj ritual. That's the ritual that all Muslims should make to Mecca if they can afford it and if they can. Right? And part of the Hajj ritual includes a ceremony called the Rami al-Jamarat, the throwing of stones. What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to go to 3 stone columns, right, and throw pebbles at these columns. The stone columns are symbolic of Satan, and by throwing pebbles at them, you are symbolically stoning or throwing stones at Satan to show that you don't like Satan. This is a 1942 photograph of the ritual, and you can see that that stone column isn't very big, right? But over the years, the Saudi government has, erected new stone columns and replaced them to accommodate the number of pilgrims that increase every year. And by last year, this is what one of the stone columns looks like. It's turned into this massive stone wall so that not everyone has to crowd around one little column. You can spread yourselves out more evenly, and thereby the Saudis are hoping they'll prevent people accidentally getting hit by the rocks and the pebbles. Right? And you can even see that there's even a structure above the stone walls too. That's to accommodate the overflow, so some people can go up on top and drop the pebbles down on Satan. Right? The Quran is the word of God, according to the Muslims, the direct word of God. The mythology is that the angel Gabriel appeared to Muhammad and told him to recite in the name of your Lord who created man from clots of blood. Right? And suddenly Muhammad began reciting the words of God sent to him directly from God through divine inspiration. And Muhammad's friends wrote down all these words that Muhammad was reciting, and after he died, they compiled all these writings together, and that's how the Quran was written. But during one of these periods of divine revelation, Muhammad said out loud, "Have you thought about Al-Lat and Al-Uzza and Al-Manat, the third other? Those are the exalted cranes whose intercession is to be hoped for." Then he realized he said something very sacrilegious or heretical. Who are Al-Lat, Al-Uzza, and Manat? They are three Arab goddesses that date back to pre-Islamic times. But Islam only has one God. These goddesses should not exist. Right? And what did he mean by those are the exalted cranes whose intercession is to be hoped for? What that means is that he was saying that people could ask these three goddesses to intercede on their behalf with God. If you're Roman Catholic, you know about how you can ask saints to intercede for you, right? Mary's a popular one, Saint Joseph's a popular one, right? But this can't be done in Islam because Islam has only one God. So Muhammad then realized that Satan had interfered with the divine revelation. And he had that verse, which I put in red print, deleted before it ever got into the Quran. This is William Muir, a guy from Scotland. He was very fascinated by Islam. He moved to Asia and studied the religion extensively. And he was also Governor General of the Northwest Provinces of India during the time of the British Raj. And he coined the term the Satanic verses to describe those verses about the three pre-Islamic goddesses. So now you know where Salman Rushdie got the title for his novel. Now there's some debate amongst Muslims about whether the Satanic verses incident actually happened. According to a lot of people from Muhammad's time and the centuries afterwards, it really did happen. Satan really did interfere with the divine revelation. Ibn Ishaq, one of the earliest biographers of Muhammad, wrote that it really happened. Al-Tabari, another early biographer of Muhammad, also said it happened. This is a photograph of the late Shahab Ahmed, a professor of Islamic studies at Harvard University. And he was fascinated by the Satanic verses incident. He wrote a book about it. And he said that Muslims believed it happened for the first 150 years of the Islamic era. And then afterwards, a lot of them began to deny that it ever happened, because that would imply that Muhammad was flawed or faulty, right, and was not a perfect human being. But Professor Ahmed also notices, like several other Muslims, that the Quran does give Muhammad a so-called out of any flaws or faults with the Satanic verses. Because in the Quran, Surah 22, chapter 22, verse 52, God does mention that never have we sent a single prophet or apostle before you with whose wishes Satan did not tamper, but God abrogates the interjections of Satan and confirms his own revelations. In other words, God is saying that every prophet and apostle he sent down has gotten some interference with Satan, but God will always find a way to make things right. So even if Satan had interfered with the divine revelation to Muhammad, that in no way means Muhammad is in any way a flawed or faulty human being. In recent years, there's been a lot of conspiracies about practically anything and everything on the internet, And the Satanic verses is no exception. There are various Muslim so-called scholars who now claim that the Satanic verses incident never happened and that no Muslims ever believed it in the past 1400 years, and that it's a very modern conspiracy theory created by the Americans, the Christians, the Jews, and the Israelis. Right? And they have all these YouTube videos claiming that Americans, Jews, Christians, and Israelis invented the Satanic verses incident. Unfortunately, these conspiracy theories had the Streisand effect of drawing unwanted attention, because their conspiracy theories caught the attention of other conspiracy theorists, right-wing Christians who previously had no knowledge of Islam or Muhammad, at least no real, genuine, knowledge. And they latched onto these conspiracy theories and said, well, here's proof that the Quran was actually written by Satan, right? Which, of course, is equally false. And all of these, you'll find people promoting either of these conspiracy theories on YouTube, which I consider the home of conspiracy theories. Back to Christendom now. Satan was largely absent from Christianity in the medieval era, from about 500 to 1000 CE. Christians believed he was out there, but they didn't pay any attention to him. They didn't think that he was actually there walking amongst them or having any significant effect on their everyday life. Occasionally, Satan would show up as a character in a comedy play or in humorous illustrations like this of Pope Sylvester II meeting Satan. But towards the end of the medieval era, a series of disasters and plagues and calamities befell Europe. Right? From about 800 CE to 1000 CE, the Vikings raided the rest of Europe. That's not actually an actual photograph of a Viking raid. That's from a Marvel Comics movie, right? The Avengers. Right? And as the year 1000 approached, various Christians thought doomsday was coming. Right? That seems to happen every 1,000 years in Christianity. And shortly after the millennium, Europe went to war against the Arabs in the Crusades, a series of major wars. And in the 13th century, Europe itself got invaded by the Mongolians. And in the 14th century, the Black Death hit Europe and killed 75 to 200 million people. 30 to 60% of the European population died during this plague. And just as Europe was getting out of the medieval era and entering the early modern era, when feudalism was gradually being replaced by modern economies and Europeans were rediscovering science and they were sending ships abroad on voyages of discovery and trade, the wars of religion broke out with the Protestant Reformation. Right? Here's a painting of one of the more notorious incidents of the wars of religion, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in France, where the Catholics massacred the Protestants. And during these centuries of turmoil and trouble and war and plague, Christians began to think that maybe there really is some supernatural, powerful, evil spirit out there causing all this misfortune. And they began to view Satan as being powerful and also active in their world. And this is when Satan began to look, well, more satanic. Satan didn't show up in medieval art very much. And when he did, he typically looked like this angel on the left side, right? From the Basilica of Santa Apollinare Nuovo in Ravenna. There, Satan looks almost human. He's got wings, right? But as time went on to the late medieval period, Satan began to acquire the characteristics of an animal: horns, hooves, tail, and a very ugly face, right? Now, and this is a typical depiction of Satan that we think about today. None of these depictions of Satan are actually canonical. neither the Bible nor the Quran actually describes what Satan looks like, but this is how our folklore depicts him now. And the late medieval era and early modern era were filled with scapegoats. Christians were blaming all sorts of different people for their problems, right? And each of these scapegoats was accused of working with Satan. There were Jews. They were often accused of working with Satan. They often accused Muslims of working with Satan. Indeed, one of the medieval words for Satan, Baphomet, originated as a French crusader nickname for Mohammed. But over time, the Europeans stopped using it to refer to Mohammed and began to use it to refer to Satan. And of course, various heretic groups like the Cathars, the Knights Templar, got accused of working with Satan. Another group of people who got accused of working with Satan were the so-called witches. Witchcraft trials and witch hunts were very rare in the early medieval period, but they became very common in the early modern period, right, around the 1500s. And it was terrible. 30,000 to 50,000 people were executed as witches from about 1400 to 1700 CE. Although the witchcraft trials began to gradually reduce around 1600, a few people still got executed as late as the 1690s, especially in New England. And these witches were all accused of working with Satan. Europeans began to believe that Satan was, in their everyday world. Not just hidden away somewhere up in the sky or below the earth, that he was actually here with us, right? And they began to think that, well, if he's here, we can actually make a deal with him. I mean, you can make deals with merchants and bankers and the people down the street. Why not make a deal with Satan? And the idea that you could make a deal with the devil got popularized in fiction, like the play Dr. Faustus by Christopher Marlowe. And one of the most famous deals with the devil, or legends or rumors about it, is related to a book called the Codex Gigas, also known as the Devil's Bible. Right? This is the largest extant illuminated manuscript in Europe. Right? It dates from the early 13th century in Bohemia, current-day Czech Republic, and it now resides in the National Library of Sweden. Right? It's a Bible, a handwritten Bible, because this was the days before, photocopiers or Gutenberg's press. And the legend is that there was a monk who had broken so many of his vows that his superiors were going to execute him. But he begged his superiors to let him live if he could write out the whole Bible overnight. So they let him do that. Well, when he was in his room alone at night, he realized there was no way he was going to finish writing out the Bible by the morning. So he prayed to Satan for help. You'd think he prayed to God, but no, he prayed to Satan. So Satan showed up in his room and wrote out the whole Bible by the morning, and thus saved the monk's life. But Satan, being Satan, had to include a full-page self-portrait in that Bible. And that's why it's called the Devil's Bible. Since Satan was in our everyday lives and down here on earth with us, people began to believe that he could actually enter our bodies and possess us. And thus began the idea that Satan could possess us. This is where the idea of satanic or demonic possession begins, right? Many of you have probably seen this movie from 1973, The Exorcist, right? Very famous movie about satanic possession. Belief in satanic or demonic possession became so popular by the 1600s that the Roman Catholic Church created a rite of exorcism in 1614, and it's still around the Catholic Church. It was most recently updated in 1999. In 2014, the US Catholic bishops authorized an English translation for use in the United States, which implies that in the US, Satan has forgotten how to speak Latin and we have to communicate with him in English. Christians also began to conflate Satan with the serpent in the Garden of Eden, right? Every Sunday school teacher's probably taught you that, that serpent in the Garden of Eden was Satan. But was that really Satan? It's true that in the book of Revelation, the author of Revelation calls Satan the huge dragon, the ancient serpent, who's called the devil and Satan. But a lot of people think that's really more like a simile. It's like calling someone a pig, right? I mean, when you call someone a pig, you don't really mean he's actually a pig. It just means he's as disgusting as a pig, right? And serpents were feared by the ancient peoples. So, this was just a way to insult Satan. The other issue is that the book of Genesis, where the serpent appears in the Garden of Eden, was written by the Jewish people who had no concept of Satan as this powerful being and source of all wickedness. That's a Christian concept that later got into Islam, right? So where did this idea of Satan being the serpent in the Garden of Eden come from? Well, I think it actually came from Islam. Because in the Quran, Surah 7, verse 20, Satan goes to Adam and tempts him to eat the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge, right? The Quran says he, Iblis or Satan, said, "Your Lord has forbidden you to approach this tree only to prevent you from becoming angels or immortals." The Quran doesn't say a serpent was in the Garden of Eden. It said that Satan or Iblis had entered the Garden of Eden. Now here's an interesting difference between the Quran and the Bible. In the Bible, the serpent tempts Eve to eat the forbidden fruit, and then Eve tempts Adam to eat the fruit. In the Quran, Satan tempts Adam first to eat the forbidden fruit, then Adam tempts Eve to eat it. Okay. Christianity also borrowed the idea of Satan being a fallen angel, an angel who had been evicted out of heaven. Again, your Sunday school teachers may have pointed out to Luke chapter 10, verse 18, where Jesus says, "I have observed Satan fall like lightning from the sky." But there's one problem with this. This can't possibly be the expulsion from heaven, because by the time Jesus was born, Satan was already, out of heaven and acting evil. Right? So where did Christianity get the idea of Satan being a fallen angel? Christians got it from the first book of Enoch. Remember that Jewish apocalyptic text that did not get into the Jewish Bible? Because that book has Shemahaza, right? A fallen angel who leads the other fallen angels. And in the Quran, in Islam, Iblis, or Satan, is explicitly an angel who got kicked out of heaven. Around 1650, Europe entered its age of enlightenment. The Renaissance was on. Europeans were rediscovering science. They were starting to get more tolerant of differences in other denominations, right? And belief that Satan never really went away, but largely people stopped believing that he could actually interfere in their ordinary lives or take over their bodies, right? And so Satan began to take a smaller and diminishing role in Christian religious life. But Satan found another role in European society. He became an anti-hero in art and literature, right? Thanks to a poem, an epic poem called Paradise Lost by John Milton. So he's still evil, but you can sympathize with him a little bit now in literature. Now today, Satan is generally, in the background. There are, of course, people who believe in him, but a lot of people think that he might really be just a symbol of evil as opposed to an actual supernatural being lurking around us. But in the 1960s, in an age of counterculture movements and New Age movements and new religious movements, a movement called atheistic Satanism popped up. Right? Now, what do I mean by atheistic Satanism? I'll explain. The most popular or most well-known of the atheistic Satanist organizations was the Church of Satan, founded in 1966 by this fellow, Anton LaVey. And those of us who were around in the 70s may remember seeing this book, The Satanic Bible, in bookstores. I saw it in every Coast bookstore, in every mall in the 1970s, right? It's grossly misunderstood by people who haven't read it. It's not actually a book that promotes evil or doing bad things to other people. And indeed, Anton LaVey didn't actually promote evil at all. When someone asked Anton LaVey what was the philosophy of the Church of Satan, he said it was just Ayn Rand's philosophy with ceremony and ritual added. Okay? Anton LaVey did not actually believe Satan existed. He didn't believe God existed either. He did not believe in any supernatural beings. He and the members of the Church of Satan were actually skeptical atheists. What he was promoting was the idea that Christianity was filled with hypocrisy, right? And that people should live their lives without this hypocrisy. They should be able to do the things that they like without feeling guilt. They shouldn't be modest all the time. They should be able to brag as long as it was accurate, right? So it was a form of egoism that he was promoting, right? He said that you should be able to do whatever you want as long as it's legal and doesn't harm other people, right? Don't go with the guilt. Don't go with the modesty. They did hold rituals, though, where they dressed up in strange robes and pretended they were performing satanic rituals, like this one, right? There's Anton LaVey with one of his girlfriends, Diane Hegarty, right? They're performing some sort of ritual. But as it turns out, none of the members of the Church of Satan actually believed that they were summoning demons or Satan or communicating with them in these rituals. These rituals were essentially a form of cosplaying, right? For some reason, human beings feel the great need for rituals, and sometimes they'll just invent rituals just to fill that need. Also, it was hard to take Anton LaVey's Satanism seriously, considering that he was always searching out celebrities to entertain them. Here he is with Jane Mansfield and wearing what looks like a Halloween costume. It's hard to take him as high priest of the Church of Satan while he's wearing that costume. And here he is with Sammy Davis Jr. He was always looking for Hollywood celebrities, and they seemed to like having him around because he had entertainment value. None of them were actual Satanists, though. With Anton LaVey and Sammy Davis Jr. is a fellow named Michael Aquino, and we shall talk more about him later. In 2004, a naval technician in Britain's Royal Navy was the first person to register his religion as Satanist with the British military, right? And he was a member of Anton LaVey's Church of Satan. And the British military decided, well, we allow all religions here, and if he wants to identify as Satanist, we'll let him register Satanism as his religion. And so the Royal Navy has at least one registered Satanist. Here's another atheistic Satanist organization you may have heard of, the Satanic Temple, which was founded in the United States in the year 2013. Like the Church of Satan, it doesn't believe that Satan actually exists. It doesn't believe that God exists. It doesn't believe in any supernatural beings. Rather, it uses Satan as a symbol of political opposition towards right-wing governments in the United States. Every year they hold an annual convention called SatanCon, and here is a SatanCon attendee tearing pages out of a Bible. Their platform is the complete separation of church and state in the United States. And they are famous or infamous for making these statues of Satan, which they call the Baphomet monuments, and applying to state governments to erect them on government property. In the last few years, there's been a lot of right-wing state governments in the US that have erected monuments to the Ten Commandments on government property. The Satanic Temple argues that to be fair to all religions, state governments should also erect monuments to other religions. So they've applied to those governments to erect a statue of Satan in state legislatures or government property. That's their statue, the Baphomet Monument, and it's obviously based on this famous picture of Baphomet, Satan, by the French occultist Eliphas Levi. Well, those are the atheistic Satanist organizations, the organizations that don't really worship Satan as a supernatural being, but use him as a symbol of their, beliefs. But there are a few small theistic Satanist organizations, and these, by theistic Satanism, I mean organizations that actually believe Satan is a supernatural being and hold some sort of belief in him. And one of the most interesting ones is the Temple of Set, founded in 1975, right? Remember Michael Aquino, the fellow who visited Sammy Davis Jr. with Anton LaVey? He was a former member of the Church of Satan, but grew to believe that Satan was actually real. So he left the Church of Satan and founded the Temple of Set. All the while, he was a U.S. Army officer. Right? He started as a second lieutenant right out of university, and by the time he graduated, he was a lieutenant colonel. And during this time, he held a lot of different positions in military intelligence and psychological warfare operations, especially in Vietnam. He was a NATO liaison officer in several European countries, and while he was a NATO liaison officer, he claims to have participated in a satanic ritual in a castle in Germany. Right? So while he was a U.S. Army officer, he founded his own religion, the Temple of Set. Well, the National Enquirer, that very famous, reputable newspaper, a bastion of journalism, found out that there was a satanic high priest in the U.S. Army, and not only that, he was a U.S. Army intelligence officer with access to top secret information. So the National Enquirer broke the news to the American public about a Satanist with access to top secret info. This article actually quotes a U.S. Army spokesman saying there's nothing wrong with that because the U.S. Constitution guarantees freedom of religion. So any of his officers can belong to any religion and even set up his own religion if he wished to. Here's a photograph of Michael Aquino and his second wife Lilith. Of course, he had to have a wife named Lilith. Now let's look at what the Temple of Set believed. It was an occult initiatory order. That means that you had to enter it by initiation and ceremonies. You just couldn't self-declare you believed in what it believed in and join. Right? You had to be initiated into it. All these organizations seem to like initiation rituals. It rejected the atheism of Anton LaVey's Church of Satan. And it believed that Satan was an actual supernatural being and that they could invoke him in rituals. But it also rejected the traditional concept of Satan. Michael Aquino thought that Satan was actually the Egyptian god Set, and that he wasn't actually evil, but he was powerful. And they didn't say they worshipped Satan or Set. They said they wanted to learn from him. This religion had an emphasis on using magical rituals to acquire powers for self-deification. What that means is they thought that if they practiced these rituals and invoked these supernatural beings and asked for the help of Set, human beings, could also acquire supernatural powers and be like gods. Right? I don't know if any of its members actually succeeded in that purpose, but that's what they were trying to do. It's not a big organization. I've heard there's probably only between 200 to 500 people in it across the world. Satan, outside of these interesting organizations, looms very large in our popular culture. I've lost all track of the number of movies, novels, TV shows, comic books, radio plays, what have you, that have Satan as a character. And Satan's personality and his portrayal and his imagery varies considerably from book to book or movie to movie or TV show to TV show. He could be as ugly and evil as the Satan in the movie Haxan, Witchcraft Through the Ages, or she could be as cute and pretty as a supermodel like Elizabeth Hurley in Bedazzled, which is my favorite portrayal of Satan. Okay, so and this is one of the most recent images of Satan. It comes from a Match.com commercial by Ryan Reynolds, right? Match.com is that dating website. And in the year 2020, Satan goes on Match.com to find a girl to date. And he meets this girl, who is the year 2020 personified. Since both Satan and the year 2020 come from hell, of course they get along. You remember 2020 was not a great year, right? So as you have seen, over the centuries, Satan has meant different things to different people in different times. He's had a whole bunch of different jobs, from being God's prosecuting attorney to fallen angel to leader of demons to just some guy using Match.com looking for a girlfriend. Right? So thank you for listening to this lecture, and maybe on October 31st someone will show up at your door looking like Satan asking for candy. Just give it to him or her. Question period now. If there's any questions.
Questions?
All right, yeah.
Derwin, Zoroastrian is a descendant of some early Persian religions. Is there anything that sort of leads to the concept of the devil or evil in an earlier Persian, or as I sort of read up, Phoenician?
There sort of is. I didn't show the slide because I was, if I want to talk about Satan, I could be here for hours, but I don't want that. There's an ancient Sumerian or Babylonian demon called Pazuzu, right? And if you find old statues of him, he looks very much like our medieval Satan. He's got horns, he's got wings, he's got a very ugly face, right? And Pazuzu was the ancient Sumerian and Babylonian demon for bad weather. Right? So he was another person who caused a lot of harm and destruction. And I have a feeling that Pazuzu was definitely an influence on ancient peoples like the Iranians or Persians to come up with the idea of a hero of mind you, anger mind you, right? The evil spirit, right? Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, no more questions, surely.
All right, that's fine.
All right.
All right,
Don't move.
don't move. Okay.
So where did Ghostbusters get Zul from?
Pazuzu. Who was it in Ghostbusters? Was it Pazuzu?
No, it was Zul.
Zul. Okay.
Zul, the minion of Gozer.
I don't know where that one came from.
Well, I think Gozer was probably Hoser.
Yeah.
Since
Actually, if you want to see Pazuzu in the movie, there was a really awful sequel to the Exorcist called Exorcist II: The Heretic, where Pazuzu makes a guest appearance.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Derwin. I will say no more, having said probably more than enough in the intro, but allow me to present you with this sacred beer mug.
Oh yes, sacred beer mug.
Sacred
Yes.
beer mug.
I think the Sumerians and Babylonians had a goddess
Yeah,
of beer too.
they did,
Yeah,
yes.
yes.
And they would have appreciated this, and we know that you will too. Thank you, everyone.
All right, let's just get forward with Ken.
This has been another in our series of webcasts produced by the Royal Canadian Military Institute in Toronto as a public educational service. You can find news of upcoming events and links to our webcast archives at www.rcmi.org. On behalf of the RCMI, this is Eric Morse saying goodbye for now, and thank you for joining us.